It's another Flashback Friday, and as you know, on a Friday I like to flash back to the toys of my childhood. And I've made a number of videos across the past year looking at some of my favourite toys from my childhood, which was mainly the 1990s and a little bit of the tail end of the 1980s. But so far, there's been one major omission, one massive toy line that I've not even touched upon, and that, of course, is Action Man. Now, I should point out that the Action Man that I grew up with in the 1990s was owned by Hasbro. This is a very different beast from the original Action Man that was produced in the mid to late 1960s by British toy company Palitoy. Those figures in themselves were very much taking inspiration from the American G.I. Joe doll that had released just a couple of years previous, 1964. And these figures were usually military-inspired action men who might be in the Navy, they might be in the Army, but they would all essentially have the same base body, the same sort of head sculpt, and each Action Man would sport a distinctive scar on his cheek, as well as having felt hair on top of his head and what they call the eagle eye feature, which allowed his eyes to move from side to side, which is very, very cool. And for the hands, they would have these essentially rubber hands that would allow them to grip any amount of weapon or vehicle controls, and there were an enormous amount of vehicles produced to support this line, which made it very, very exciting. And of course, you could swap out different costumes and have whole armies of action men duking it out. Now, the line eventually faded into obscurity until Hasbro came along in the 1990s and purchased the intellectual property and rebranded Action Man for the 90s. And of course, they were significantly updated and given a very 90s flavour. Of course, for those unfamiliar, 90s toys, especially boys' toys, were hyper-masculine, so they had very muscular bodies and more elaborate accessories. But the Action Man of the 1990s was just as much fun for kids growing up as those who were first introduced to them back in 1966. And like most boys of my age, I was very, very into this brand, and I had quite a few Action Men across the years. But today I'm going to take a look at one of my personal favourites, which was the Moonraker Action Man. So starting with the packaging, I've always had great affection for the Action Man logo. Not because the logo itself is particularly exciting, but I think that vivid, bright orange is really, really attractive, and there's something very, very exciting about it, even to this day. And I think this particularly appeals to young children who respond very, very positively to bright, almost neon colours. And this orange is super vibrant, so I still I still get excited when I see this logo. I think it's absolutely fantastic. And the packaging, of course, is this big open window display and this big sort of square box, really, this cube packaging. At the bottom we can see sort of this idea of a moon effect, although it's got quite an orange hue to it, so it looks almost like Mars, to be honest. But I do like, of course, that it's called the Moonraker Space Explorer, which is quite fun. But of course, I think what's really nice about this figure is that the figure is actually slanted, so on its display, and at the base of the Moonraker itself, this diagonal sort of packaging recreates more of this sense of being on the moon. And because it's tilted diagonally, it feels like the vehicle's coming towards. It just makes it a bit more exciting and gives it much more depth. It creates a sort of three-dimensional effect when you look at this on the shelf. And the side panel, once again, has that Action Man logo there, a little bit of the window display so you can see the back of the Action Man, but crucially we have a lot more artwork here, and again, this is now clearly a moon of another planet altogether, hence I suppose the orange hue to it all, and we can see there's a planet in the stars there, which is quite nice with a ring going around it, so this is quite exciting, this is quite fun. And then finally on the reverse, we have a photo of the toy in all his glory there, and obviously they've created a nice lunar diorama for the vehicle to be driving across, which looks really cool. And then at the top there we have some more artwork of the stars, and of course that planet with the rings going around it. It looks really, really cool, very, very fun, very exciting. And of course there's all these orange bits of text which are emphasising some of the key features of the vehicle and of the play that you can have. And there's also mini maps and suggested storylines that children can embark on. So starting with the Action Man himself, the first thing you'll notice about this figure, aside from the fact that it looks really, really cool, is the fantastic texturing to the costume, which is this wonderfully padded, soft, fluffy material that makes it really nice to the touch, but it also feels quite authentic. It feels like this is the kind of thing a spaceman should be wearing. One of the most impressive features of the figure is that fantastic helmet and that wonderful chrome mirrored visor there, which looks really good. Now, over the years, mine has become a little bit worn away. You can see some of the brown underneath where the chrome's come away, but it has lasted very, very well through much play, I must stress, and I think it looks absolutely fantastic. I love that they did this. The helmet is very easy to remove as well. It just clips off, but it is very secure when it is strapped in, and it looks really good. Of course, the head sculpt is the standard Action Man head sculpt from this time. There were a couple of variants across the years, but this initial line still maintained this sort of fuzzy felt hair. I'm glad to say that mine has still managed to hold on to his. A lot of my others are definitely balding, but his has managed to stay pretty good across all the years. And of course, he does have that distinctive scar there that has been maintained through every version of Action Man across the years, which is fantastic. I particularly like this head sculpt. This is, I think, is maybe the second generation from the 90s Hasbro Action Man. I think this is a pretty solid likeness, for lack of a better word, not that it's based on anyone in particular, but I do think this is a very good all-round sculpt. I really like this one. They would go on to release another head sculpt which would actually have moulded hair rather than having the fuzzy felt, and I think that head sculpt definitely had more than a passing resemblance to Pierce Brosnan, although I don't know if that was intentional or just my own eyes drawing a comparison there that was never intended. As I've mentioned, I really like the tailoring on this figure. I think he has an absolutely fantastic costume, and I think it's been very, very well rendered and brought to life. I love it. So obviously he has that base sort of jumpsuit, as I said, it's made of that very lovely textured material there that makes it feel really fluffy and very authentic, which is very cool. It has some nice designs on it. It is mostly all white, of course, or a sort of off cream colour, but it has the sort of the Action Man branding in the piping around the cuffs, which I think is quite nice. And this is supported by a rubber harness that goes over it, and that's quite nicely detailed. It looks like it's got appropriate pouches and different buttons and features on it. None of it is sadly painted in, so it's really difficult to quite tell what it is supposed to represent, really. But all in all, it looks pretty good. It looks pretty authentic. And again, on the reverse of the backpack there, we have some nice bit of detailing in there. Nothing too impressive, nothing much to write home about, but it certainly does the job and creates the appropriate effect. And you'll notice on the side there are these two bright neon orange translucent plastic missiles, which are his accessories, which we'll take a look at a little bit later, but they strap very nicely and snugly into his side panels, which add a little bit of flash of colour to this figure, which is nice, but also act as a very welcome holder for these missiles. As I said, there's not an awful lot of detailing added to this costume, but there are some nice attempts to add some stickers and transfers to the arm patches. Of course, we have the Action Man logo, which is ever present, which is pretty cool. Adds a little bit of flush of colour there as well, which is nice. And then we have the gloves. These are quite nicely designed. They wear crisp white, I can assure you, when they were bought, but over the years, the individual grooves has definitely picked up some dust and dirt from lots of wear and play. But yeah, they look very nice. They just clip on to the hand, but as you can see, they are open-handed, so this is obviously to allow the Action Man to be able to still grip weapons and the vehicle and different things like that, whilst creating the illusion of him being fully kitted out in his spacesuit. So this is still kind of visible, but I think it just about gets away with it, and it's still pretty. And then the legs, much like the upper torso again, has the same tailor in there, another patch on the upper thigh there to create a space logo, which is, you know, adding a little bit of extra colour and interest to the suit, which is quite nice. But then crucially we have the boots, and the boots I think are very nicely done. They are a rubber piece, but they have a rim at the top that allows the top of the cuff of the leg to be able to just tuck into it nicely, so it feels and it looks as if it fits seamlessly, and it looks really, really good. This is actually excellent, I have to say. I think they've done a very, very nice job of this, and as I said, it looks seamless, which is brilliant. So in terms of articulation, the 90s Action Man had a ball joint in the neck, which is pretty cool, so he can spin his head right the way around if you want him to, and he can also nod backwards and forwards a pretty decent distance as well. He does have ball jointed shoulders, so his arms can lift all the way up to the top and stretch right the way back, which is pretty cool, and he has a single jointed elbow, which is pretty cool. Now, earlier toys from the Action Man line actually had this rubber arm effect, which is sort of seamless articulation, but this definitely actually has the articulation that you can see the joints in the elbow. Now he's got a pin swivel at the wrist, so his hand can rotate 360 degrees and of course hinge backwards and forwards as well. And then he's got a ball joint at the waist, which means he can rotate from side to side and of course move forwards and backwards. He's got hinged hips, so the legs do kick out all the way to the side there, they kick forwards and backwards, and they also bend at the knee because there is another single joint there. And then finally, the ankle is also a pin swivel as well, although it is difficult to get the most out of the articulation with those boots, but they can hinge forwards and backwards and rotate from side to side. So moving on to the Moonraker or the Moon Buggy, this is a really nice simple design, but it looks very authentic to what we're used to seeing in news footage, documentaries and NASA reels, and it looks really fun for such a simple design. Now the vehicle itself is very lightweight, it is a very light plastic, but that is all to its benefit. And it is of course just big enough to sit the Action Man on here. There's not a huge amount of detailing, it's a fairly nice sculpt, but there's not a lot of paint washes or apps over this, but again, you wouldn't expect it given the context. But Hasbro have definitely made an effort here to try and make it a bit more fun, a bit more appealing and a bit brighter by adding some colourful stickers around the side to just give it a little bit extra pizzazz. And of course the vehicle does move, those wheels are articulated so they will roll forwards and backwards as well. There's no steering on this vehicle, but you can simply move it around yourself. And you'll have no doubt have noticed there is a central steering column that the Action Man can sit on grip, and there's some very nice stickers here, some of that sort of technical graphics which are quite fun, very colourful, and definitely give this a more added interest. I quite like this definitely brightens up the whole vehicle and makes it feel a bit more exciting. And this central column is articulated so it can move from side to side and up and down as well. And then on the side you may notice there is this rather suspicious looking barrel shaped weapon which can be removed and placed into the hands of Action Man and used to fire one of those orange missiles, and we'll look at that in a moment. But in terms of the overall design, this is quite simply designed. Obviously there is just two tones, there's that flat grey and then there is that wonderful bright neon orange sort of disc in the centre there, which looks really fun. And of course you can take one of those long missiles that are on the spaceman's backpack and insert it in here, and then there is a little trigger there that you can press and fire. And because it is spring-loaded, it goes at quite a pace. And I have to say, I definitely have memories of this misfiring several times and ended up in my eye. And it's quite a fierce missile, I have to say, but very cool nonetheless. And I think it looks absolutely fantastic. And of course, this can be placed into the Action Man's hand, or it can sit comfortably on the Moon Buggy, and it looks good either way. And that's it, there you have it. I have to say, I have tons of affection for this toy, of course I do. It's absolutely everything that a boy of my age at the time could want. I loved Spacemen, it was one of my first great loves. Spacemen and dinosaurs were very much at my centre of my heart when I was a child. And yeah, being able to have an Action Man is just the icing on the cake. So this was absolutely fantastic. There's not a lot of features to this in terms of actions, but it is great that he comes with that missile firing rocket launcher there, which is pretty cool. It's fantastic the buggy actually moves around, and to be honest, you don't really need a great deal more for this. Everything is kind of set up here. If you want a spaceman to go out into space and explore, you've got everything you need. And of course there is that slight action element as well. But overall, really, this toy is all about the spacesuit and how it looks, and I think they've just done a tremendous job of it. And you know, all these years later, it still gives me great joy to look at it and put it on display. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.